I haven't slept properly in 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. Not because I can't, because I'm afraid of what watches me when I close my eyes. The insomnia started when I was 26. It crept in slowly at first, like most terrible things do. A few restless nights turned into weeks of staring at my ceiling, counting shadows, listening to the house settle. My doctor prescribed the usual suspects: Ambien, melatonin, meditation apps that promise serenity through guided breathing. Nothing worked. The exhaustion became physical. I'd find myself crying in the grocery store checkout line over nothing. I called in sick to work so often they stopped pretending to believe me. Then I saw the ad: clinical trial for chronic insomnia, promising results. Full sensory deprivation therapy combined with precisely calibrated electromagnetic neural stimulation. The science sounded legitimate enough. The payment was substantial. They needed participants willing to undergo multiple sessions over 6 weeks. I scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday. The facility was in a renovated industrial building downtown, the kind that used to make textiles or processed meat before the neighborhood gentrified. Dr. Sarah Chen met me in a surprisingly normal-looking office, all potted plants and ergonomic chairs. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of calm competence that made you trust her immediately. She explained the procedure in detail. I would be placed in a sensory deprivation tank, completely isolated from external stimuli. While in this state of profound sensory absence, electromagnetic pulses would be delivered to specific regions of my brain associated with sleep regulation. The theory was that by completely removing external input and directly stimulating these neural pathways, they could essentially reset my circadian rhythm. I signed more consent forms than I thought possible: liability waivers, confidentiality agreements, acknowledgments that this was experimental and results could not be guaranteed. Dr. Chen walked me through potential side effects: temporary disorientation, mild nausea, heightened sensory sensitivity for a few hours post-treatment. Nothing that concerned me, nothing that compared to the hell I was already living. The first session was scheduled for the following Monday evening. The treatment room was in the basement. I remember noticing how the temperature dropped as we descended the concrete stairs, how the fluorescent lights flickered at irregular intervals. The tank itself was larger than I anticipated, a sleek fiberglass pod that looked like something from a science fiction film. The water inside was heated to skin temperature, saturated with Epsom salts to create complete buoyancy. Dr. Chen helped me position the electrode cap on my head, each contact point carefully placed according to some map I couldn't see. "Try to relax," she said. "Let yourself drift. The first few minutes might feel strange, but your brain will adjust. We'll monitor you the entire time. If you need to stop, just call out. We'll hear you and end the session immediately." I lowered myself into the water. It felt like disappearing. The moment Dr. Chen closed the tank lid, reality just stopped. No light, no sound, no sense of up or down, just floating in absolute void. For the first few minutes, I was hyper aware of my own body. My breathing seemed impossibly loud. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Then gradually, even those sensations began to fade. That's when the electromagnetic stimulation began. I can't describe what it felt like. Not pain exactly. More like someone was playing my brain like an instrument, finding frequencies and rhythms I didn't know existed inside me. Colors bloomed behind my eyelids, and possible geometries that folded in on themselves. Time became meaningless. I could have been in that tank for 10 minutes or 10 hours. Then I felt it. A presence in the void with me. Not a physical sensation, but an awareness. The absolute certainty that I was not alone in that darkness. Something was there, sharing that sensory null space, existing in the same nowhere I'd been submerged into. I tried to move, to call out, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, suspended, while this presence moved closer. It touched my mind. I don't know how else to describe it. Not a physical touch, but a violation of consciousness. Something reached into my thoughts and looked around like a stranger walking through my home. Opening drawers, examining possessions. I felt it cataloging me, learning me, mapping the pathways of my memories and fears. I tried to scream but had no mouth. I tried to think of something, anything to push it away, but it had already burrowed deeper. Then it stopped. The electromagnetic pulses ceased. The tank lid opened. Dr. Hall, Chen's face appeared above me, professional concern in her eyes. "You've been in for 90 minutes, she said. "How do you feel?" I couldn't speak at first. My body felt wrong, like I had been wearing someone else's skin and had just now noticed. She helped me out of the tank, wrapped me in heated blankets, ran through standard post-treatment protocols. I answered her questions automatically. Yes, I felt oriented to time and place. No, I wasn't experiencing nausea or dizziness. No, nothing unusual had occurred during the session. I lied about that last part. I didn't tell her about the presence, because I'd already convinced myself it was just a hallucination, a side-effect of sensory deprivation and electromagnetic brain stimulation. Of course I'd experienced something strange. That was the point of the treatment, wasn't it? To disrupt normal neural patterns. She scheduled my next session for 3 days later and sent me home with monitoring equipment, a sleep tracker to wear on my wrist, a journal to record my sleep quality and any unusual experiences. That night, I slept for 11 hours straight, deep, dreamless, perfect sleep. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in months. The treatment was working. I should have known better. The second session felt different from the moment I entered the building. The lights in the stairwell seemed dimmer, the temperature colder. Dr. Chen seemed distracted, kept checking her tablet between explanations. I asked if everything was alright. She smiled, said she was fine, just busy with data analysis from my first session. The neural activity they'd recorded was fascinating. She didn't elaborate. I got into the tank again. Lowered myself into that artificially warm darkness, let the lid close above me, waited for the void to take me. This time, the presence was already there, not just a feeling or awareness, but a definite entity. I could sense its shape, if you could call it that, a configuration of intention and attention that existed independent of physical form. It was waiting for me. It had been waiting since the first session. Patient in that space between spaces where sensory input died and consciousness floated untethered. The electromagnetic stimulation began, but now I understood what it really did. It didn't just stimulate my brain. It opened doorways, created bridges between states of consciousness, and something had been on the other side of those bridges, looking for a way through. This time, when it touched my mind, I felt it push deeper. Not just observing anymore, taking root, establishing pathways that wouldn't close when the session ended. I tried to fight it, tried to maintain some boundary between my consciousness and its invasion, but I was helpless. It was so much stronger than me, so much more practiced at existing in that void space. When Dr. Chen opened the tank this time, I saw her face and knew something was terribly wrong. Her expression wasn't professional concern, it was fear. She helped me out quickly, her hands shaking slightly as she removed the electrode cap. "Did you experience anything unusual?" she asked, and I heard desperation in her voice. "Any sense of presence, communication?" I stared at her. "What is this really? What are you really doing here?" She didn't answer. "Just help me, Drez." Ran through her standard protocols faster than before and practically rushed me out of the facility. She didn't schedule my next appointment, didn't ask me to come back at all. I never saw Dr. Chen again, but the presence did. The first week after that second session, I tried to convince myself everything was fine. I was sleeping better than I had in years. 8 hours every night, no medication, no tossing and turning. My productivity at work improved. Colleagues commented on how much better I looked. My boss even mentioned a possible promotion. Everything should have been perfect, except I wasn't alone anymore. It started small. The sense that someone was in the room with me when I knew I was by myself. A cold spot that followed me from room to room in my apartment. Shadows that moved wrong, lagging behind their sources by half a second. I'd turn off a light and swear I saw something darker than darkness slide away from the switch. I tried calling the facility. The number was disconnected. I drove back downtown to the renovated industrial building. The office was empty, not just vacant, but stripped. No furniture, no equipment, no sign anyone had ever been there. Just bare walls and water stains on the carpet. The building manager told me the space had been listed for lease for months. No one named Dr. Chen had rented it. No clinical trial had been conducted there. I filed a police report. They took my statement with barely concealed skepticism. There was no evidence any medical facility had operated there. No licensing records, no business permits. The consent forms I'd signed, I couldn't find them. The monitoring equipment they'd sent home with me, it had vanished from my bedroom drawer. Even the bruising on my forearms from the IV line they'd used during the second session was gone, healed overnight in a way that wasn't medically possible. It was like the entire thing had been erased from reality, except for what stayed with me. A month after my last session, the manifestations intensified. I woke up one night to find words written in the condensation on my bedroom window. Not English, some alphabet I didn't recognize, angular and sharp. When I wiped them away, my finger came back cold enough to burn. The next morning, there were faint scars on my fingertip, precise lines that formed symbols matching what I'd seen on the glass. I started documenting everything, photographs of shadows that appeared in multiple reflections simultaneously, audio recordings of breathing that came from empty rooms, video footage of objects moving when I wasn't looking. I needed proof, needed evidence that I wasn't losing my mind, but the data corrupted. Every time, photos turned into static, audio became high-pitched screaming that wasn't there when I'd made the recording. Video files wouldn't open or showed only black screens. The presence didn't want to be captured, didn't want evidence of its existence beyond what it chose to show me. 3 months in, it touched me for the first time. I was cooking dinner, something mindless to distract myself from the constant awareness of being watched. I reached for a knife from the block on the counter, and something grabbed my wrist. Not physically. There were no fingers, no hand, but a force, ice cold and absolutely solid, held my arm immobile. I watched, frozen, as my own hand turned the knife toward my stomach, blade pressing against fabric. The pressure increased. The tip of the knife punctured my shirt, began pressing into skin. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch as this thing that had been following me decided to test how much control it actually had. Then it stopped, released me. The knife clattered to the floor. I stumbled backward, pulled up my shirt with shaking hands. There was a small cut, barely deep enough to bleed. A warning, a demonstration. I understood then that it could hurt me whenever it wanted. Could have killed me right there. But it chose not to. This wasn't about destruction. It was about something else. I stopped going to work, called in sick indefinitely, then just stopped responding to emails, stopped seeing friends, stopped leaving my apartment except for absolute necessities. The isolation felt safer somehow. If I minimized my interaction with the world, maybe I could minimize the damage this thing could do through me. But the presence seemed to grow stronger in isolation, fed by my fear and loneliness. It began appearing more distinctly, no longer just cold spots and moving shadows. Now I could see its shape, tall, unnaturally thin, with proportions that hurt to look at. It stood in corners and doorways, watching me with something that wasn't quite eyes. I tried everything to get rid of it. Researched exorcism rituals online and performed them in my living room at 3 in the morning, candles burning, salt circles drawn, prayers spoken to gods I didn't believe in. The presence watched from outside the circle, amused. When I finished, it stepped over the salt line without hesitation and stood so close I could feel the absence of warmth radiating from it. I consulted with psychics, mediums, anyone who claimed they could communicate with or remove spiritual entities. Most took one look at my apartment and refused to enter. Those who did try their cleansings and banishments left quickly. Shaken, one woman, an elderly spiritualist who'd been doing this work for 40 years, stood in my doorway and told me in a quiet, terrified voice that what followed me wasn't a ghost or demon. It was something she'd never encountered before, something that existed in a space between consciousness and reality, and it had found a way to anchor itself to me through the neural pathways that had been opened in that tank. It's learning, she said. Every day it's more present, more real. Eventually it won't need you anymore. It will be able to exist here fully on its own. And when that happens, she didn't finish the sentence, just left and never answered my calls again. 6 months after my last session, I finally found information about what had really happened. Buried in archived news articles, hidden in obscure medical journals, and redacted government documents I accessed through channels I'd rather not describe. Dr. Sarah Chin wasn't a sleep researcher. She'd been a neuroscientist working on classified military projects, consciousness transfer, creating neural bridges between human minds. The sensory deprivation tank wasn't for treating insomnia. It was an experiment in opening human consciousness to something else, something that existed in the spaces where sensory input died and pure awareness remained. There had been other participants before me, 12 of them. The news articles reported their deaths as suicides, simultaneous, all on the same night, exactly 6 months and 3 days after their final session. They'd killed themselves in identical ways. Self-inflicted wounds to the throat, precise cuts that severed both carotid arteries simultaneously. The medical examiners noted that the wounds were too controlled, too perfect to have been self-inflicted, but couldn't explain any alternative. I found their names, looked up what I could about them. Every single one had reported the same things I'd experienced. The presence, the manifestations, the growing control it exerted. One had left a video diary. I watched it late one night. Laptop screen the only light in my dark apartment. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken and wrong. He spoke directly to the camera, voice flat and emotionless. "It's not following me," he said. "I'm becoming a doorway. Every day it's more here, more real. It's using my consciousness as a bridge, my neural pathways as its anchor point. When it's strong enough, it won't need me anymore. It will be fully present in this world, and I'll be." He paused, eyes focusing on something off camera. "I'll be wherever it came from. We'll trade places. That's the point of the experiment, not to help us, to help it cross over." The video ended there. He was dead 2 days later. I counted the days since my last session, 6 months and 1 day. I had 2 days left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from insomnia this time, but from absolute terror. The presence was in my bedroom, more visible than it had ever been, almost solid. I could see the suggestion of features now, a face that was wrong in every dimension, eyes that were empty spaces that somehow still looked at me. It stood at the foot of my bed, perfectly still, watching me with patient attention. I tried to run, grabbed my car keys, threw on clothes, ran for the door, but my body stopped halfway there, froze mid-step. The presence was behind me. I could feel it, and suddenly I understood it didn't need to physically restrain me. It was already inside my nervous system. It could override my motor control whenever it wanted. My body walked back to the bed, sat down, lay back, all without my conscious choice. I was a passenger in my own flesh. The presence stood over me, and I felt it pushing deeper into my mind, exploring, expanding, taking up more space, making room for itself by compressing me into smaller and smaller corners of my own consciousness. I was crying, couldn't stop crying, tears running down my face while my body remained perfectly still, controlled by something else. Then suddenly it withdrew, not completely, but enough that I could move again. I gasped, curled into a fetal position, shaking uncontrollably. "Please," I whispered to the empty room. "Please just kill me. Just get it over with." The presence didn't respond. It never spoke, but I felt its intention clearly in my mind. It wasn't going to kill me. Not yet. It was going to let me exist for 2 more days, conscious and aware, knowing exactly what was coming, understanding that I would live those final hours as myself before something else took my place entirely. 2 days to say goodbye to being human. I spent the next day trying to find help, called every psychiatric facility in the state, begged them to commit me, sedate me, lock me away somewhere the deadline couldn't find me. But what could I tell them? That an entity from another dimension was going to steal my body? That a classified military experiment had opened a doorway in my consciousness and something crawled through? They heard a man in the middle of a psychotic break, offered medication, therapy, intervention. Nothing that addressed the actual problem. Nothing that could stop what was already inevitable. I thought about following the example of those 12 previous participants, ending it on my own terms before the deadline. I stood in my bathroom with a razor blade, pressed it against my throat hard enough to draw blood, watched the red line appear, felt the sting, but I couldn't do it. Some fundamental instinct for survival kicked in, made my hand shake, made me drop the blade. I sank to the bathroom floor, blood trickling down my neck, and wept like a child. The presence watched from the doorway. I could feel its satisfaction. The second day, I stopped trying to fight. What was the point? There was no help coming. No last-minute salvation. I'd opened a door in a sensory deprivation tank, and something had walked through. That was reality, simple and irreversible. I spent the day doing meaningless things, watched television without processing what I saw, ate food without tasting it, took a long shower, noting distantly how the water felt on my skin. This skin that would soon belong to something else. This body that would walk and talk and exist, but with a completely different consciousness driving it. Would anyone notice? Would my coworkers realize I wasn't me anymore? Would my family sense something wrong when they saw me? Or would the presence be perfect in its mimicry? Would it become me so completely that no one would ever know the difference? Would I simply cease to exist, erased from reality while my body continued without me? Night fell. My last night as myself. The presence was everywhere now. I could see it in every reflection, every shadow, every peripheral glimpse. It wasn't hiding anymore. Didn't need to. We both knew what was coming when midnight struck. I sat on my couch, lights off, watching the clock on my phone tick toward the deadline. 11:30, 11:45, 11:50. At 11:57, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. What was the point? But some automation made me pick up, lift it to my ear. Stop. Dr. Mine, Chen's voice, strained and terrified. You have to stop it. Fight it. You're stronger than it is. What? I can barely speak. How? You knew this would happen. You did this to me. I didn't know, she said, and I heard genuine anguish in her voice. The project was shut down, classified. We weren't supposed to continue, but I thought I could control it, use it. I was wrong. Listen to me. The others, they gave up. They let it take them. But you don't have to. It needs you to surrender. If you fight, if you hold on to yourself, it can't complete the transfer. How? I screamed into the phone. How do I fight something that's already inside me? Remember who you are, she said. Every memory, every moment, every piece of yourself, hold on to them. Don't let it compress you. Don't let it make you small. Fill every space of your own consciousness. Leave no room for it. The call ended. The clock hit midnight, and the presence pushed. I can't describe what it felt like. Imagine someone trying to turn you inside out while you're still conscious. Every neuron firing in wrong patterns. Every memory being accessed, examined, copied. My entire sense of self being compressed, squeezed, forced into smaller and smaller spaces, while something else expanded to fill the void. I felt myself disappearing, my childhood fading to gray, my mother's face becoming indistinct, the taste of my favorite food, the sound of my own laugh, the feeling of sunshine on my skin, all of it being replaced by something else. Foreign memories that weren't mine, thoughts and patterns that didn't fit my brain, emotions that had no human equivalent. I was dying, not physically, but in every way that mattered. Dr. Chen's words came back to me. Remember, hold on. I grabbed at memories like a drowning person grabbing at driftwood. My 7th birthday party, chocolate cake, and terrible magician. The first time I rode a bike without training wheels. The smell of my grandmother's perfume. My first kiss, awkward and sweet. The day I graduated college. The taste of coffee, the sound of rain, the feeling of laughing so hard your stomach hurts. Every memory I could summon I held, refused to let them fade, pushed back against the compression, expanded myself into every corner of my own mind. The presence pushed harder. It was so strong, so practiced at this. I felt my grip weakening, felt myself losing pieces. What was my mother's name? What color were my eyes? Where did I grow up? I wouldn't let go. Michelle. My mother's name was Michelle. My eyes were brown. I grew up in Portland. I had a dog named Max who died when I was 12. I cried for days. I read comic books. I was afraid of spiders. I loved thunderstorms. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 6. I broke my arm falling from a tree at 8. My first car was a beat-up Honda Civic. I kissed someone named Alex at a concert once and never saw them again. I had a scar on my knee from falling off my skateboard. I loved the smell of old books. I was terrified of deep water. I could never whistle. I once ate an entire pizza by myself and felt sick for days. Every detail, every tiny insignificant piece of being human. I held them all, wouldn't let them go. The presence screamed, not with sound but with frustrated rage that reverberated through every atom of my consciousness. It had expected surrender, expected me to fold like the others. But I was still here, still holding my ground. Then it changed tactics. If it couldn't compress me, it would shatter me. Pain exploded through my nervous system. Not physical pain, but something worse. The sensation of being torn apart at a molecular level. Every synapse firing wrong. Every nerve ending screaming. My body convulsed on the couch. I bit through my tongue. Blood filled my mouth. My hands clawed at my own face, drawing blood, leaving gouges. I couldn't scream. My throat was locked tight. I could only endure while the presence tried to literally destroy me from the inside out. My vision went dark, then came back in flashes. The room spinning. Ceiling, floor, ceiling, floor. I was on the ground, writhing, seizing. My skull felt like it was splitting open. I could feel blood running from my nose, my ears. This was it. This was how I died, not through surrender, but through being physically destroyed. My brain literally couldn't withstand what was happening to it. I thought of my mother, hoped she wouldn't blame herself, hoped she'd never know what really happened to me. Then something changed. The pain stopped. Not gradually, but instantly. Complete cessation. I lay on the floor, gasping, blood on my face and hands, and felt the presence withdraw. Not completely. It was still there, still connected to me, but it had pulled back, retreated to the edges of my consciousness. I didn't understand at first. Then I felt it. Exhaustion. Not my exhaustion. Its exhaustion. The attempt to take me over had drained it somehow. It had expended massive amounts of energy, whatever energy meant for something like it, and now it was weak, but temporary. I could feel it recovering already, gathering strength. It would try again. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And next time I might not be able to resist. I dragged myself to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. I barely recognized the face looking back. Blood everywhere. Eyes bloodshot and wild, scratches down both cheeks, where my own nails had carved through skin. But still my face, still me. I washed the blood away with shaking hands, applied bandages to the worst cuts, drank water directly from the faucet. My body was shaking so badly I could barely stand. The presence watched from the doorway, waiting, patient. We both knew this wasn't over. It was just delayed. Dr. Turan Chen had bought me time with her warning, but what could I do with that time? I couldn't keep fighting it off indefinitely. Eventually my willpower would fail. Eventually I'd sleep too deeply, or be too tired, or make some mistake that would give it the opening it needed. I needed real answers about what this thing was, where it came from, and how to permanently sever the connection it had established. I went to my computer, started searching with new terms. Not sleep research or consciousness transfer, but older concepts. Neuroscience journals from the 1960s, Soviet research into psychic phenomena, CIA documents about Project MKUltra, the intersection of human consciousness and whatever existed in the spaces between thoughts. Hours passed. The sun rose. I barely noticed. I was reading accounts from prisoners used in sensory deprivation experiments, monks who achieved states of consciousness that transcended physical reality, indigenous shamanic practices involving altered states in contact with entities. Pattern began to emerge. Throughout history, across cultures, people had encountered things in altered states. Most called them spirits or demons, but they were all describing the same thing: consciousness without physical form, awareness that existed independent of matter, entities that could only enter our reality through human minds, opened in very specific ways, sensory deprivation plus electromagnetic stimulation. That was the key. It created a unique state where a consciousness detached enough from physical reality to touch something else, something that had been waiting on the other side for exactly that kind of opening. Dr. Chen's experiment hadn't created these things. They'd always existed. She just found a reproducible method of making contact, and once contact was made, the entity could establish a permanent connection using the open neural pathways as a bridge between its dimension and ours. But here's what I learned. The connection went both ways. If it could reach into my consciousness, I could reach into whatever passed for its mind. If it was using me as an anchor to this reality, I was also its anchor. We were connected, entangled, and that meant it was as vulnerable to me as I was to it. I just had to figure out how to weaponize that vulnerability. I spent the next week researching, planning, preparing. The presence watched, growing stronger each day, testing its control in small ways, making my hand move without permission, forcing me to speak words I hadn't chosen, taking over my dreams and turning them into nightmares that felt more real than waking life. But I endured because I had a plan. I found a lab that did experimental neuroscience, convinced them I was a graduate student researching consciousness, gained access to their sensory deprivation tank and electromagnetic stimulation equipment. It wasn't identical to what Dr. Turmeric Chen had used, but close enough. If the connection had been established through sensory deprivation and stimulation, maybe I could use the same method to sever it, go back into that void space where the entity existed naturally. But this time I wouldn't be a passive victim. I'd be an invader. I scheduled time in the lab for late on a Friday evening when no one else would be there. Told the research assistant I needed 4 hours. She looked skeptical, but didn't argue. Probably assumed I wanted to trip out in a tank, unsupervised. I went through the setup alone, positioned the electrodes on my own head, checking placement against the notes I'd made from my sessions with Dr. Chen. Lowered myself into the warm, salt-saturated water, let the lid close above me. The void took me immediately, faster than before, like falling down a well with no bottom, and the presence was there, waiting. But this time, I didn't try to resist. I let it approach, let it think I'd given up, surrendered, accepted the inevitable, felt it reach into my consciousness with eager attention. Then I reached back. If you've never tried to grab something that has no physical form, I can't explain how it's done. It's not physical motion. It's an act of pure will. Consciousness grasping consciousness. I felt for the connection point, that bridge it had established between us, and I pulled. The presence recoiled, shocked. It hadn't expected me to fight back in this space. Here, in the void where it was strongest, it had assumed dominance, but I wasn't bound by the same rules it was. I existed in physical reality primarily. It existed here. That gave me an anchor it lacked. I pulled harder, felt the connection strain, felt the entity try to withdraw, retreat back to whatever dimension it called home. But it couldn't. The bridge went both ways, and I was holding my end with everything I had. Come here, I thought at it. You wanted into my world so badly. Come all the way through. Terror radiated from it, pure existential horror. It understood what I was doing, understood that if I forced it entirely into physical reality, it would be trapped there, subject to physics and matter and mortality, everything it had been trying to avoid by using human hosts as partial bridges. It fought. God, how it fought. The void space shattered around us. I felt my body convulsing in the tank, electrical activity in my brain spiking to dangerous levels, but I didn't let go. Couldn't let go. This was the only chance I'd ever had. I pulled with everything I was. Every memory, every moment of identity I'd fought so hard to preserve. I used them as anchors, weights, gravity pulling this thing that had no mass into a reality where everything had mass. The connection stretched, thin. I felt it beginning to tear. Then something unexpected happened. The entity stopped fighting, went completely still, and I felt something from it I hadn't felt before. Not emotion exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, understanding. It had been trying to cross over completely for so long, using human consciousness as bridges, that it had forgotten what it was to exist purely. It had been trapped between dimensions, neither fully in its home space nor fully in ours. I wasn't forcing it into our reality. I was severing the connection that kept it partially in both. If I succeeded, it wouldn't be trapped in physical reality. It would snap back to wherever it came from. The broken bridge unable to hold it any longer. But that meant I would snap back too, fully into physical reality, fully severed from that void space I touched. The entity understood this, understood that we both wanted the same thing, so it helped. Together we pulled in opposite directions, stretching the connection, tending it to a thread. I felt it straining, every neural pathway it had carved into my brain screaming in protest. Felt my physical body arching in the tank, muscles locked in full tetanic contraction. Felt blood vessels in my brain beginning to rupture from the strain. This would probably kill me. The shock to my nervous system was too severe, but I'd be dead as myself, not as a meat puppet for something else. The connection snapped. Reality shattered. I felt myself being pulled in opposite directions simultaneously, my consciousness fragmenting across dimensions, pieces of me scattering like drops of water. Then everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital. 3 days later, according to the doctors, they'd found me in the sensory deprivation tank, unresponsive, severe brain hemorrhaging, EEG showing patterns they'd never seen before. I technically died twice during transport to the hospital. They brought me back both times. The neurologist showed me the CT scans of my brain. There was extensive damage, sections of my frontal and temporal lobes that had simply hemorrhaged, neural tissue destroyed. They told me I was lucky to be alive, lucky to be able to speak, to recognize faces, to remember my own name. They kept me for 2 weeks. Ran every test imaginable. Couldn't find a medical explanation for what had happened to me. The research assistant who'd found me in the tank told them I'd been doing consciousness research. They assumed I'd had a stroke or aneurysm coincidentally triggered during the session. I didn't correct them. When I was finally released, I went back to my apartment with profound trepidation, opened the door slowly, stood in the doorway, listening, feeling. Nothing. The presence was gone. The cold spots were gone. The shadows moved normally. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed only me. The sense of being watched, that constant awareness of another consciousness observing me, had vanished entirely. I was alone. Actually, truly alone. I cried for hours. Relief and grief and residual trauma all pouring out. I'd survived. Barely, but I'd survived. The brain damage was permanent. I have trouble with memory now. Simple tasks sometimes confuse me. I can't work like I used to. Had to go on disability. My life is smaller now, quieter, but it's mine. I sleep in absolute darkness every night. No night lights, no ambient glow from electronics. I need to prove to myself that darkness is just absence of light now. Nothing more. Nothing hiding in it. Nothing waiting. Most nights, I succeed in believing that. Most nights. Because here's what they don't tell you about surviving something like this. The connection may be severed, but the memory remains. The knowledge that consciousness is not unique to physical matter. That there are things that exist in spaces between thoughts, between moments, between realities, things that can reach through if doors are opened. And once you know that, once you've touched it and survived, you can never truly forget. Sometimes in that moment between waking and sleeping, I feel something, not the presence that specific entity, but a knowledge that I've been marked, that others of its kind know about me now. Know that I found a way to sever the connection. Know that I'm dangerous to them. They stay away, for now. But I wonder sometimes what would happen if I went back into a sensory deprivation tank. If I allowed myself to drift into that void space again. Would they be waiting? Would they try to establish new connections? Or would they destroy me outright for what I did to one of their kind? I'll never know. Because I'll never take that risk. I live a simple life now. Quiet apartment, few friends, no ambition beyond making it through each day. People who knew me before the experiment probably think the brain damage stole something essential from me. They're right, just not in the way they think. What I lost wasn't cut into function or memory. What I lost was the comfortable illusion that reality is simple, biological, that we are alone in the universe. I know better now, and that knowledge weighs heavier than any brain damage ever could. 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days since my last session in that tank, since I severed the connection and fought my way back to being human. I marked the time not out of fear, but out of respect. Respect for how close I came to losing myself entirely. Dr. Dare. Chen never contacted me again. I tried to find her, to tell her I survived, to ask her what she knew about the true nature of those entities, but she'd vanished even more thoroughly than her research facility. No records, no trace, like she'd been erased from reality itself. Maybe the thing she was playing with decided to erase their mistakes, remove the evidence, eliminate the researchers who'd found ways to contact them. Or maybe she's still out there somewhere, running new experiments, opening new doors, finding new victims who don't understand what they're volunteering for until it's far too late. I hope not, but I suspect yes. Because that's the thing about forbidden knowledge. There's always someone arrogant enough to think they can control it. Always someone who sees power and possibility where they should see danger. Always someone who thinks they're different, special, exempt from the consequences that destroyed everyone before them. I was one of those people once, desperate enough and foolish enough to volunteer for an experiment I didn't understand. I paid for that hubris, paid in brain damage and trauma and nights of terror. I still sometimes relive, but I survived. That's worth something, maybe worth everything. So I live my quiet life, take my medications, do my cognitive exercises, avoid darkness and silence and anything that might open those neural pathways again. I exist in the comfortable, narrow bandwidth of normal human consciousness, and I'm grateful for it, because I've seen what lies beyond, touched it, fought it, survived it, and I know with absolute certainty that it's still out there, in the spaces between thoughts, between moments, between realities, waiting, patient, eternal. The doors are still there, will always be there, and someone, somewhere, is opening them right now, letting something through, creating a connection they think they can control. They're wrong, but they'll learn the hard way, just like I did. The only difference is I found a way to survive my lesson. Most don't. I think about the 12 participants who came before me, who all killed themselves exactly 6 months and 3 days after their final sessions, who faced what I faced but didn't fight back, didn't find the strength or knowledge or pure stubborn rage to resist. I think about them often, wonder what they saw in those final moments, whether the transfer was instantaneous or gradual, whether they knew at the end that they were being replaced, whether they screamed inside their own heads as something else to control. I hope it was quick. I hope they didn't suffer the way I suffered in that tank, pulling at a connection that fought back with everything it had. But I suspect they did. I suspect that's why they all chose death instead. Better to end it on their own terms than let something else do it for them. I understand that choice now, in the moments when the brain damage is worst, when I can't remember my own address or recognize my face in the mirror. When the simplest tasks become impossibly complex, I understand why they made that choice, but I'm still glad I fought, still glad I survived. Even if some days I'm not sure survival was worth the cost. My mother visits once a week, brings groceries, helps with bills I can't manage anymore, asks how I'm doing in that careful voice people use with the damaged. I tell her I'm fine. She doesn't believe me, but doesn't push. She's good like that. She doesn't know what really happened to me. No one does. The official story is stroked during a research experiment. Bad luck. Random medical event. Nothing sinister. Nothing that requires explanation beyond faulty biology. Let her believe that. It's kinder than the truth. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with this expression, grief mixed with confusion, like she's trying to find the son she used to know in the stranger sitting across from her. She knows something essential changed but can't identify what. I want to tell her I'm still here, still me, that the core of who I was survived even if the packaging is damaged. But I don't know if that's true. How much of personality is just neural patterns? How much of identity is just electrical signals in specific configurations? When those patterns are destroyed, when those configurations are scrambled, what remains? Am I still the person who went into that tank, or did I die there too? And what came back is something new, wearing my memories like borrowed clothes. I don't have answers, Just questions that circle endlessly in a brain that doesn't work quite right anymore. But I'm here. That's something. That's maybe everything. The sun sets. Another day survived. I watched through my window as darkness covers the city. It used to be my favorite time of day. The peaceful transition from light to shadow, day to night. Now I tolerate it. Watch it approach with apprehension I can't quite suppress. Night means sleep. Sleep means dreams. And dreams mean that space where consciousness drifts untethered, where the boundaries between realities thin, where anything might reach through if I'm not careful. Most nights are fine. Normal dreams without normal things. Flying or falling or showing up to class naked. The usual human neural nonsense. But some nights, I dream of the void. Dream of floating in absolute darkness while something watches from all directions simultaneously. Dream of the presence, not the one I fought, but others like it. Curious, observing, wondering if I'm still connected somehow. Still accessible. I wake from those dreams with my heart racing, covers soaked with sweat, checking every corner of my room for shadows that move wrong. Nothing over there. Just fear and memory and damage that won't heal. I tell myself it's just dreams. Just my brain processing trauma. Nothing real. Nothing dangerous. I almost believe it. Almost. The thing about surviving something impossible is that it recalibrates your understanding of what possible means. Before the experiment, I knew, intellectually, that human knowledge was incomplete, that there were things we didn't understand. But I believed in the fundamental reliability of reality. Believed that consciousness was biological, that matter was solid, that the space between thoughts was empty. None of that is true. Reality is thinner than we think. Consciousness is stranger than we imagine. And the spaces we think are empty are actually crowded with things we've evolved specifically not to perceive. Because perceiving them would drive us mad. Because knowing they exist would make normal life impossible. I perceive them now. Or at least I know they're there. The brain damage didn't take that knowledge. Can't take it. It's carved too deep. Burned into neural pathways it's revived the hemorrhaging. So I live with it. This knowledge. This burden. This awareness that humanity exists in a comfortable ignorance. Oblivious to what surrounds us in dimensions we can't access, and that sometimes through specific combinations of circumstances, those barriers break down, sensory deprivation and electromagnetic stimulation. That's one way, but there must be others. Throughout history, people have had encounters, touched something beyond normal consciousness, come back changed or not at all. Shamans, mystics, the mentally ill who were ill at all, but connected, artists who saw too much and couldn't bear it, addicts chasing altered states without knowing what they might find there. How many people have made contact? How many are living with it right now, hosting entities they don't understand, losing themselves gradually to something else? I'll never know, but I think about it, wonder if I pass them on the street sometimes, see someone with that particular haunted look, that sense of being occupied, and wonder if they're fighting the same battle I fought, wonder if they'll survive it, wonder if I should warn them, or if knowing would only make it worse. I've considered going public, telling my story, warning people about the dangers of consciousness research, about what exists in the spaces we're not meant to access. But who would believe me? Brain-damaged former insomnia claims interdimensional entities tried to steal his body through experimental sleep treatment. I'd be dismissed as delusional, institutionalized probably, medicated until the memories faded to nothing. Maybe that would be better. Maybe forgetting is the kindest outcome. But I can't forget, won't forget. The damage won't let me. Those neural pathways are carved too deep. The experience too traumatic to ever fully suppress. So I remember, I survive. I mark each day as another small victory against the void. And I wait, because even though the connection is severed, even though the presence is gone, I know this isn't over. Not really. Nothing that profound ever truly ends. It just changes form, goes dormant, waits for its moment. I felt something yesterday, brief, barely noticeable, the flicker of that old awareness, the sense of being observed just for a second while I was doing dishes, staring out the window at nothing. Then it was gone. Probably nothing. Probably just lingering trauma, neurons misfiring, brain damage, creating phantom sensations. Probably. But I've started sleeping with the lights on again, just in case.